Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Jimmy Fike.
Hi there. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing really well, thanks. To still be alive and kicking and gainfully employed and have a book coming out after the last 2 years feel very lucky, very fortunate.
Yes, for sure. So can you tell me about your book that's coming out?
Well, yeah, sure. I'd be really happy to. And for like the past 13 years, I've been working on a photo series. I've traveled around the continental U.S. finding, photographing, and illustrating wild edible plants in an effort to create kind of a continent-spanning collection. And Indiana University Press saw my work and reached out and asked if I would like to do a book. And I said, heck yeah, I would love to do a book. So we came up with this idea of using my photographs to create a field guide type book, but I really think it's kind of like a coffee table version of a field guide. So it has about 110 of my photographs of wild edible plants, and then a text entry that's a lot like a field guide, a kind of a descriptive entry about where you might find the plant, what it looks like, which parts are edible.
Yes. And I was reading through some of it. I tried not to finish it because I do have a physical copy coming and I want to look through it and see some of these for the first time. But I wanted to get a general idea of the book. And what I read, it's your photography is just absolutely stunning in it. And I'm somebody that thinks it's so important to learn about the world around us and trying to protect our environment and all these things. So it was really fun to read through and see all of these new things that I hadn't heard of before when it comes to edible plants and foraging and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the kind words about the photography. I've been working on that series for so long. I think that kind of like anything that you work at for a long time, you get better and better and better at it. And really, I think the last few years, I just found this sweet spot with the aesthetic and the technique where I really honed in on it and really, proud of that work. And yeah, you're right. One thing that I really learned working on this series is just how abundant wild edible foods are and how we are just absolutely surrounded by them every day. And most people don't even realize it. And I think there's a lot of potential in gaining that awareness and how it could affect people psychologically, but also the environmental movement and things like that.
Yeah, as I was reading through too, there were so many times where I went, "Oh, I've got that in my garden. Oh, I've seen that before." Even in some cases, like when you're talking about the plantain, and I was like, "Oh, I've used that to heal bug bites." So it was. Found that really interesting, seeing how little I knew about my own garden, and in some cases, how much I knew.
Yeah, right. I think we kind of learn a little bit of that stuff culturally as we're kids, right? Just kind of stuff around the neighborhood or that the older folks might know, some folk wisdom. But yeah, it's a really revelatory experience to me too. I'm not, trained as a botanist or anything like that. So it was a real process of discovery for me too. And it absolutely changes the way you see the environment once you start to learn these plants.
Most definitely. So how did you get into photography and specifically nature photography?
Well, I studied art at Auburn University back in the day. And, I started doing design, and then I started doing painting, and then I got into photography eventually, and something about it just really clicked for me. No pun intended, but, there's something just so, I think, transformational about the act of photography, the relationship between your vision, your psychological state or emotional state, and how you can use kind of the aesthetic force of photography to transform the world in a way that amplifies that sort of vision, and something about that really resonated with me and felt like it was really profound. It did something a little bit different than the other types of art that I was studying. I think where it really kind of had a moment was one summer I took off and worked in Yellowstone for the summer and did a lot of kind of just really like traditional landscape, nature, even like tourist sort of photography.
Mm.
I really enjoyed it, and everybody I showed the work to was just really impressed and really encouraged me. And so I think that was kind of the beginning of my interest in photography and landscape that time.
That's so cool. And I really agree with you what you were saying about like how photography can touch on different things than different types of art. Because like there's so many things that you can say with a photo that you can't always say with writing. Just like there's so many things you can say with writing that you can't say with a photo. Like it's everything has its own place in this.
Yeah, each medium kind of has its unique attributes and ways of working in relationship to self and exterior world, and all those sort of things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, photography just really captivated me. It's really fascinating field of study to go along with just kind of like that more personal experience of creating images that do something really powerful to you as a creator and as a viewer.
Yes, 100%.
Right.
So we were just talking about like your interest in photography, but how did that lend itself into writing this book and like the writing part of it? Were you ever interested in writing?
I've never really been a big writer. I feel like I'm good at writing, but it's not something I'm particularly drawn to and do a lot of.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a professor, so of course in my academic life I have to do a fair bit of writing, and anybody that's an artist too these days, you have to do a good bit of writing in terms of artist statements and proposals and things like that. So this book was the writing was really much more technical and descriptive. And I'd worked before as a freelance writer for the Gale Group, doing book synopses. And I feel like that experience really helped me with kind of how I approached this, by being able to kind of like read lots of different primary sources and kind of call information and come up with a way of talking about the plants that was accurate and descriptive and those kind of things. But yeah, I've never really considered myself a writer. It just kind of became part of the vision for this project and the way it needed to unfold. And it was an interesting process to do the writing. I feel like the photography and the Photoshop stuff comes just very naturally to me. I'm just really happy to sit down at the computer and put on some music and do that for hours and hours. Like the writing side, I had to kind of pump myself up a little bit more. It was a little bit more like work to me, but still a good experience. I found that it was really helpful to get out into nature to do the writing too. So I would pack up all my gear and go my computer and go sit in the forest and work on the writing side of it for a few days, and then come back to town and edit it and check stuff for accuracy once I had internet access again and stuff like that.
That is so cool. I always love hearing about like where people go to write, because I've talked to a whole spectrum of people on this show, and like sometimes it's like what you were saying, like I need to like kind of go out into nature and it can help clear my head. And then I've also seen people be like, no, I have this one very specific room in my house that is dedicated to this and it has to be in there. And like I think it's so interesting, like how the setting can impact the writing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that sort of environment and that context really, I think, changes things. And yeah, maybe especially for artistic types who are really sensitive to those factors.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell me a little bit about the pairing of art and science in this book and like the process that you went through for that?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a really interesting topic, and something I think about a pretty good bit. I read a good bit of scientific work, and read a good bit of stuff about Buddhism and good stuff about art. And I just don't really see the boundaries that much between these things.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like people often think of science as like the opposite of spirituality or the opposite of art. But I can really say that my readings about science have instilled so much wonder in me, and profoundly shaped my understanding of the world and of ecosystems. And if you look at the way, Buddhist Thich Nhat Hanh or Dalai Lama talk about inner being or interdependency or these things, it's so parallel to the way that evolutionary scientists talk about symbiotic evolution and things like that. It's incredibly rich overlap. I think you can take that background in science and spirituality, and then add art to the mix, and it opens up a kind of richness in discourse and makes connections and interjects things about mythology and psychology that are maybe new elements within that that mix of influences. But for me, it's kind of a really seamless kind of back and forth, and they really feed each other, and I think come together in interesting ways. I think when you first look at my photographic work, I intentionally make it look a lot like scientific illustration at the first glance, right? But the longer you sit there and you stare at these images, the more they start to kind of evolve into those other realms of where they kind of ask spiritual questions or provide a really rich, hypnotic, aesthetic experiences. So I think even, looking at the images, you can see kind of my theory about those interrelations between those different disciplines and ways of thinking, and the process of viewing the photographs, I think, kind of follows that trajectory in an interesting way.
Yes, I was actually going to say that because there were certain times while I was reading, I mean, like pretty much every page, it was like I would just look at the photo and just be like, oh wow, that's really pretty. Like, wow, and then I would look at it for a second longer, and I would just slowly become like hypnotized by it because of like just how beautiful it is, and like how like it would just like kept making me think about like how like the world around us, and like how like many details there are in nature and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good metaphor, right, for just slowing down and looking more closely and really, really seeing things and what happens when you take the time to do that, for sure. So I'm glad you had that experience and you saw that in the work too.
Yes, it was really cool. And it was a really special experience while reading it.
Cool.
So do you have any resources that you would recommend for people interested in learning more about edible wild plants and learning more about like all the subjects in this book and identifying things?
Oh yeah, sure. There are so many great books out there that are field guides, and there's very region specific ones too that are pretty easy to find, and ones that are actually made by botanists and ethnobotanists and people with a much deeper understanding of that side of this kind of stuff than I have. But really, I think one of the coolest things that I've found this day and age is Instagram. I have made such an interesting sort of formed an interesting community on there of people that are doing ethnobotany or have kind of expanded their art practice into socially engaged art that has this element of ecology, or people that are just activists. People like Linda Black Elk, it's amazing. Kitchen Kundera, Rob Greenfield, The Curb, Black Forager. I just know their Instagram handles, but man, so it's really a lot of really, interesting stuff going on around this subject, and been really kind of fun to find that community on Instagram.
That is so cool. Yeah, I've noticed that a lot, where there's so many things, and like especially around photography, like these pockets of the internet that are like so interesting and such great communities.
Yeah, that's pretty neat, and it's neat to see what they're all up to. I've been doing this series, like I mentioned, for a really long time. 13 years, 14 years, and it felt like but back in the day, there wasn't a lot of people talking about this, about the relationship between photography and ecology, and not a lot of people really interested in the local food movement and ethnobotany and decolonizing the food chain and tapping into that indigenous knowledge and et cetera. But it's really, I think, found its moment right now, and it's really pretty neat to see it blossoming and really taking a foothold in the culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like when I was like growing up and like, especially when I was younger, but still now, like we live out in the suburbs and so we have a backyard and stuff. So my parents would always like let it kind of grow over so that way we could look through and identify different plants and figure out like where things were descended from and stuff like that. It's just so fascinating and it's so important for people to know.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. I think if you let your grass grow for a little while and get
Mm-hmm.
out there with your magnifying glass and start looking around, you'll see so many edible plants that grow in lawns. I live in Phoenix, so it's not the most lawn-filled, grass-filled place. But even here, walking around the sidewalks and stuff, I find mallow and purslane and London rocket and henbit and stork's bill and clover and dandelions, and you just go on and on. Pretty common to find 10, 15 edible plants that are just growing in your lawn if you let them.
Yeah, it's so cool. How has your location in Phoenix affected this book and your writing and research for it?
Well, I grew up in Alabama. So Phoenix, Arizona was a strange new world for me. I'd never lived in the desert. I've never lived somewhere where it doesn't rain and where it's 120 degrees.
No.
But wow, it's been, it's really been pretty mind-blowing experience. I had this preconceived notion of the desert as being dead, dry, no living organisms out here. But it's the opposite. This is one of the richest ecosystems there is, the Sonoran Desert ecosystem. It is unbelievable how many edible plants there are. So that's been so fun to me, getting out there and exploring this new, unique environment and having my preconceived notions absolutely obliterated and having this new understanding of this place and its history, and to learn scores of plants I've never even heard of before in my life, and to gain that new knowledge and insight into this place has been neat. And one kind of really unique thing about being in Phoenix is you can just head a couple different hours in any direction depending on the year, and you can be in the desert or you can be at these kind of sky islands that are 7, 8, 10,000 feet high.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot of different kind of ecological zones here and transitions from those kind of desert places to kind of alpine environments with aspens and conifers and really interesting kind of riparian zones that have their own unique plants and they're really luscious. And yes, it's a really neat state.
That's really so cool. Yeah, I remember it was December. In December, I actually went to Portland, Oregon, and we had a pit stop in Arizona on the flight. And I remember getting off the plane and it was just so hot.
Yeah.
But even just like looking out the window, like it looked very, very beautiful. And it's so hot. But
these summers are intense, but one great thing about this project is this really been made possible by a lot of artist residencies.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been really fortunate to get out of Dodge a lot of the summers when it's so hot here and go to really beautiful, unique locations to work for a month or so and discover new plants. And so I've been able to work in California and Colorado and Wyoming and Washington State and Kentucky and Alabama and New York, etc. So, that's been pretty cool. Artist residencies are just the greatest.
That's really awesome. How did you discover those and like realize that was something that you could be doing for your research for this?
I think I was a little bit slow to understand what those were and to take advantage of them. But hey, once the internet came along, it's pretty easy to start connecting the dots and to figure that out. And gosh, they're just everywhere, and there's so many of them. And it's a little bit of a competitive process to apply and to get one, but I think like I said, there's just so many that it's really doable to find one that'll accept you. And locations are often just gorgeous, and they really do a good job of just supporting your practice and helping you make the best work that you can. And you often meet other great artists there and stuff like that. So can't recommend artist residencies enough.
That's so cool. Yeah, it's really important to have like spaces where you can really focus on your art. That's really awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
So you've been working at this for 13 years. How have you seen the world change around this subject?
I definitely think it's having a moment recently. I think like the '70s, there was kind of another moment of this stuff, right? There's the back to earth stuff, and the hippies, and you had like Yule Gibbons writing, Stalking the Wild Asparagus, and writing. And then it seemed to kind of go dormant for a while. And as often the case, I think there's just kind of a lot of different cultural forces that come together to make these things reemerge. But, I think certainly there's a lot of economic factors that have caused people to want to find free food sources or make things they can use for creative economies, for things like, farmers markets or whatever, using locally sourced materials. You've seen a lot of chefs kind of get back into this idea of working with local ingredients or foraged ingredients, or, things that are raised within a certain radius. You see real effort now to talk about decolonization. And I think these issues around food and indigenous knowledge about food and medicine really kind of feeds into that. I think you've seen the kind of psychological effects of postmodernism.
Yeah.
We don't talk that much anymore, but when that was in its heyday, everybody's talking about alienation and displacement and these kind of things. And I think this is an answer to kind of some of those types of problems. And I think as we face climate change and mass extinctions, I think just within the cultural consciousness, there's just a gaining recognition that something's off, and we need to reevaluate our relationship to nature and the natural world. And this kind of understanding about plants, I think, is a big part of that.
Yes, I 100% agree.
A long-winded answer to that question.
No, it was a great answer. Yeah, like I fully agree with you too on that stuff. And having it be like resources like this book are so tremendously important for people, because then this can be like a field guide, almost like looking through it and knowing, all right, here's what I can eat if I don't always have access to go out and buy plants and stuff like that. Like it can help in so many ways. And I think it's really excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so. I think at the beginning of this, I was trying to think of ways to use photography, fine art photography, conceptual art in a maybe unique way, and get it in front of different types of audiences, broader audiences, and to make work that kind of earnestly addressed some of these issues and problems and looked for solutions.
Yes. And I love that it said like right up front at the beginning of the book too, like in the introduction, like saying like, this is something that can help people. And this was made for the reasons that you just listed. Like I really enjoyed that.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it. I thought something was really kind of unique about this too was trying to create fine art photography that had like actual utility, concrete utility. And I think that's one of the ways that makes this work more accessible to a broader population of people. And I'm just as happy with that being the art as the aesthetic experience. I think somebody looking at this book, seeing this plant, and then having the light bulb go off and recognizing something that grows outside, their house or in their neighborhood for the first time, that's art to me.
Yes. And it gives another way to experience the art. Like as I was reading it, I was thinking like, all right, once things thaw out here, I want to go around and look for these plants, and like, then I can go back to the book and figure out what I found. And like, it's just, there's so many ways to experience this book. And I think that's really great.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, that was part of my intention to have work that was what's a good word? Multivalent, kind of different ways you could approach it and get something out of it and maximize its impact in the broadest sort of sense and make something that's very democratic and egalitarian, but also very had theoretical depth and a lot of big ideas embedded in it and stuff.
So can you tell me a little bit about the process of choosing what plants to highlight in this book?
Yeah, sure. So I have a collection of just used field guides, and I go to a new location and I just start slowly walking around, seeing what I can identify. And, it's usually fairly easy to find edible plants. They're all around. So you just got to slow down and go through the process of using the field guides and whatever kind of system they have for identification and working through it. But, I just kind of walk around very slowly, get to know the place, try and identify the plants. And once I identify the plant, then, I start seeing more and more of it. And I start looking for a really beautiful specimen of it. And then I have to excavate the plant and take it back to the studio and photograph it. And I pin it up flat against a white backdrop so I can get everything arranged nicely and also get everything really, really focused on the same plane. I usually collect a few specimens of the same plant so that I can photograph extra leaves, flowers, roots, whatever it may be, and have kind of like a database of those things so that I can kind of montage together the final version of this. These, while they look like scientific illustrations, they're really not. These things are very, very constructed. And I take a lot of liberties as an artist to, design the aesthetic the way that I want it to be. And to make this, I consider kind of like an archetypal version of this plant. It's the way it would look in a idealized environment if, there was no drought and bugs weren't eating the leaves and etc.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it has been so excellent to have you on today. I only have one more question, and that is, what do you have coming up?
Well, what do I have coming up? Well, this book's coming out in a few weeks, so I'm really excited to see what kind of doors that opens up for me.
Congratulations. Also, this is exciting. Yeah.
Well, it's so exciting. This is unbelievable. It's great. And let's see. What else do I have coming up? I have an exhibition coming up at the Pittsburgh Botanical Gardens over the summer. Ooh. So I'm excited about that. I have some work up right now at Garvey Simon in New York, gallery there. And we'll see what else the future holds.
That's awesome. Well, if you ever want to come back on the show, if you end up writing another one of these or anything else, I just had a really great time talking to you today, and I'm excited to finish this book.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really fun. I appreciate you having me on and sharing the news about the book.
Yes, I hope anyone listening to this goes out and reads it and enjoys it as much as I did. Well, for Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
And I'm Jimmy Fike.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after. The end.
The end. All right.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.